We have Shelley Berman here. Dr. Sheldon Berman is currently AASA's lead superintendent for social emotional learning after serving as a superintendent across 28 school years in 4 districts. He's the author of 5 books, including The Call to Courage, Standing Up and Speaking Out Against the Assaults on Democracy, as well as numerous articles and book chapters. Dr. Berman served as the president of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents. He received the 2003 Massachusetts Superintendent of the Year Award, the 2011 Sanford McDonald Award for Lifetime Achievement in Character Education, recognition in 2011 as one of 10 courageous superintendents for providing leadership for school desegregation and achievement awards in SEL. We also will have on tonight Lavelle Brown. Lavelle Brown is an experienced educator who has held positions as a teacher, assistant principal, school CIO, and superintendent of schools. Dr. Brown has received various awards and recognitions. The 2017 New York State Superintendent of the Year has been listed by the Trust ED as one of the nation's top educators and thought leaders. Dr. Brown has been recognized by the National School Boards Association as a 20 to watch and difference maker. He received the Center for Digital Education Top 30 Award and received the East School News Tech Savvy Superintendent Award. Recently, Dr. Brown received the prestigious Dr. Effie H. Jones Humanitarian Award from AASA. And welcome.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I just want to start by saying thanks for all the work that you've been doing and with Red, Wine, and Blue and all the individuals who are on this Zoom. This is an extraordinary effort, and it is courageous in and of itself. And one of the reasons we wrote the book, actually, Lavelle and I, Lavelle led the work within AASA, which is the National Superintendents Association, around equity. I led the work around social emotional learning. We both realized that there was attacks all over the country around not only social emotional learning and equity, but also a whole range of issues of diversity and divisive concepts, the banning of books. I think we all are familiar with some of the attacks. And we came together to say we need to find a path that can pursue positive work in education and affirm the value of all the work that we're doing. And so that's how we came to be, co-authors of the Call to Courage. And what I'd like to do in the beginning, I know that Julie Wimbeck and Julie Collins and I will have a conversation in a couple of minutes, but where I'd like to begin is just sort of a summary of the key points of the book so that you understand what the book was about, and then share some of the sort of the evidence that we've put together and the key elements of what we think is going to be a convincing way for individuals to have the courage to move forward and to make a difference. So let me just start with just some of the key points of the book itself, which is, the first point we make in the book is that the attacks on education have been extraordinarily harmful for us. The banning of books, the restriction of curriculum, the firing of teachers, the banning of particular topics like discussions of race, discussions of accurate history, the elimination of social emotional learning programs, of equity programs. These are serious issues that undermine the quality of education. But what the key point we make is that actually the attacks come from a surprisingly small but highly vocal extremist minority that actually use fear-mongering to stir up individuals. And I'll express that in the slides I show in just a couple of moments. And their strategy is to repeatedly present false and misleading information that promotes fear for the safety and morality of children and for parent-child relationships. But there's no evidence to back up the information that they're sharing. And in fact, the most significant thing, and I'll come back and emphasize this, is that they present sort of a false dichotomy. And that false dichotomy is that the current schools promote a woke curriculum, a left-wing ideology that is indoctrinating students. And that in response, it is important that they present and that schools present a right-wing ideology and focus in on the elements of that ideology. Now, in fact, public education is the antithesis of indoctrination. It is about presenting multiple perspectives. It's about helping students think for themselves. It's about self-determination. It is not about indoctrination. In fact, it is public education is anti-indoctrination. But this false dichotomy is a foot in by using that, it's a foot in the door to say, now we have to replace woke ideology with a different ideology. So I'll come back to that but that's the sort of first point we make in the book. The second point is that there are many studies out there done by both communication firms and by research organizations that show that the vast majority of parents agree with the importance of teaching about race in historically accurate ways, of instruction in social emotional skill development, and of respect for cultural, racial, and gender diversity. That, in fact, the majority of parents agree with all of that and want to see that in our schools. So how do we shift the conversation? Because the language we speak and the words we write and convey critically important messages. And we need to not only claim those messages, but proclaim those messages in clear and positive ways. And rather than being reactive and defensive against extremist attacks and falsehoods, we need to put extremists on the defense by making direct statements about the value of what we are doing. And I'll share some of the language that we have found effective in doing that. And so, in essence, what we've been saying is that really to protect good teaching, to protect important content that students need to know, to protect students' sense of belonging, that parents and educators must proactively summon the courage to stand up and speak out against these extremist attacks. And that is even if you have not been struck in your community by these attacks. We have to preemptively go on the offense and speak in favor of existing good policies and not take their continuation for granted and not wait quietly for a proposal of a bad policy to threaten what we stand for. So the conversation we're going to have today is, I think, is a critically important conversation about how you can become more engaged, how you can articulate this in an effective way, and how you can really bring forward the courage to make a difference. This is the book, by the way. I'm going to limit my screen. There we go. This is the book, The Call to Courage. And I'll share this at the end, but if you'd like, you can just click on the QR code and you can go to the publisher of the book to see that. However, what we're going to talk about today is how we reclaim the conversation, how we protect good teaching, important content, and students' sense of belonging. And first of all, Joel Achenbach, who's a Washington Post opinion writer, wrote recently, "This country, though politically fractious since its founding, is more polarized than ever. The rhetoric more inflammatory, the rage more likely to curdle into hate. It's ugly out there." And I think we all recognize that. We see that in our political environment. And so how do we respond effectively? And first of all, we know that this is impacting schools. John Rogers and his colleagues at UCLA did a study in 2022 surveying principals across the country about what kinds of limits or challenges that they were experiencing. And this is in 2022, and it's become even more extreme now. 50% of them reported that they were challenged or limited around teaching about issues of race and racism, that they were limited or challenged around 39% of them were challenged around social emotional learning, 33% around access to books in school libraries. That has escalated significantly in my discussions with John since that time. And particularly at that point, it was 48% had been challenged around policies and practices related to LGBTQ and student rights. In fact, that now is much higher as well. And we know the consequences. We've seen teachers being fired. We've seen the battle around critical race theory and how it has been banned. That 17 states have laws that prohibit the teaching around CRT or other concepts that are divisive concepts, called divisive concept laws. That Moms for Liberty, and that I'm thrilled that you're going to be at their conference, protesting their conference. But they have, backed many school board members who have come in and fired the superintendent and insisted on policies that are extraordinarily destructive to students and to their community. And in fact, as you well know, the focus is on school board races. So while we're in a highly contentious national presidential election for senators and representatives in Congress, it is even more critical that we focus in at the local level on our school board races and be concerned about who is running and what their agenda is. And I thank Red Wine and Blue for your advocacy around that, in particular in your organizing. It's just an important contribution. And actually, we write about your contribution in the book. But there is good news. In Virginia, we have superintendents who are defying Glenn Youngkin's transgender restrictions. In Oklahoma, we have school districts that are challenging Ryan Walters, who's the commissioner in Oklahoma, attempt to have a Bible mandate. In Missouri, in spite of the resistance around social emotional learning, the majority of Missourians in the survey have backed social emotional learning. In Florida, the Sarasota School Board and other school boards have approved funding for social emotional learning, amid the far right outcry. And there are many moms across the country who have organized campaigns to push back on the parents' rights groups, which are, I think, a unique way of using language to insist that their perspective be the dominant perspective. One of the most interesting is most recently Courtney Gore, who was in Granby Independent School District in Texas. She was elected on a far-right platform that actually advocated for many of the things that Moms for Liberty advocated for. As soon as she got elected, she wanted to read the curriculum, and she read through the curriculum. And what she came out saying is that she saw none of the issues that she had feared were present in the curriculum in schools. And she came out and publicly stated that. But her defiance actually had a backlash in and of itself. But to be that courageous is in a Texas school district to say the schools are doing the right thing with students was a powerful statement. So there are many people across the country making those kinds of powerful statements. And as I referred to, there are 8 studies that have come out in the last 5 years, 6 years, that really affirm that parents are supportive of the work that schools are doing, and the majority of parents support culturally relevant curriculum. They support social emotional learning. They support teaching about race. And so let me go through a number of those. For example, the Benenson Strategy Group did a survey, and they found near universal support for the concept of making education more culturally responsive. The Echelon Research did another piece of research that showed that 2 in 3 people say that acknowledging and celebrating diversity was important. The Education Week did a survey of 1,000 registered voters and found that 85% of the respondents agreed that public school students should learn about the history of racism and slavery in the United States and how it continues to affect us today. Fordham Institute did some research on social emotional learning, and it was really surprising because they dissected this and disaggregated the data by party and affiliation, and whether you leaned Republican or leaned Democrat, and they found that overall The majority of parents, and you can see it here, over 80% of parents supported the 9 SEL related skills. So SEL is extraordinarily popular. And they also, their report said that parents saw a role for schools in promoting social and emotional learning. And in fact, that's affirmed by the Pew Research Center, by national PTA surveys, by the Benenson Group, by a survey that McGraw-Hill did, that parents want to see schools that are safe for our students, that support social and emotional learning. So the question is, how do we counter the negative narrative and move people to action? If that is the case, how do we rally these people? And I think that the problem we face is that the extremists who've taken these positions have used threat, intimidation, doxing, a whole variety of strategies that promote fear for taking a stand. And we have to overcome that fear, and we have to stand together in order to overcome that fear. So it's not our role to say what's most popular, but to make popular what needs to be said in a way that people can hear it. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. What I see as the core strategy is that we have to focus on our core purposes. We can't be derailed by the misinformation and disinformation that's presented. We've got to go back to the core purposes of the work we're doing and why that's important. So, for example, in sort of the progressive vision, I would say this is, as I brought this vision in 28 years of working in schools and school districts, what I was attempting to do is really help create a just, caring, and educated democratic community. The purpose of education is to support a democratic community. And so what we do to do that now is our frame of reference is that we want to present historically accurate and culturally representative information for students so that the information is meaningful to them. That we want to promote equity so that all students are effective, that we want to promote inclusion because public schools have to include everybody, that we want to have an environment that's safe for students, and we want to promote social emotional learning to create a positive learning environment, and that we also want to ensure that we value diversity by not promoting any particular religion or any particular set of belief, but that we're secular in a sense, and that we're pluralistic, recognizing the diversity. Now, what the right wing has done is taken that and labeled it very differently. And let me take you through the labels that they offer. So first of all, they see what I had just shared as an existential threat to the social and political status and their way of life. So for example, in terms of historical accuracy, they see it as left-wing political indoctrination and have labeled it as left-wing political indoctrination because it in fact has some critique of what is revealed in American history through slavery and through our relationships with native tribes, and they see that as undermining patriotism. That in terms of equity, they see equity as really reverse racism and the victimization of white people. They see inclusion, actually, and particularly the inclusion of individuals who have different gender identities as a radical gender identity ideology and sexual grooming. That social emotional learning is psychological manipulation and co-opting of parent rights. And that, in fact, secularism in schools, the valuing of diversity of religion by remaining secular and by separating church and state, in a sense, is seen as valueless atheism, godless government schools. And I think we've all heard that term. So, this is very similar to what we saw in the 1950s with McCarthyism, and that the current extremist message seeks to weaponize fear and faith in pursuit of an extreme ideological dominance. So if I were to go back and take a look at this, it is essentially saying to parents, Your children are being indoctrinated in a left-wing ideology, and they're being taken away from the values that you hold dear, and the schools are undermining your parents. And that's the way that they have won support. So how do we overcome that? Well, first of all, we have to understand what they're proposing instead, and oops, I'm sorry, and why it's dangerous. So and the language that they use that makes it sound like it's fine, that what they would say is our goal is to restore peace and order and pride in America. And for that, we need to bring patriotism and conservative values into schools, that we need cultural uniformity. We need to understand that there's a dominant culture here, and when people come here, they need to adapt to that the culture that is dominant. And that inclusion in terms of gender, that there are two genders, and we need to recognize and teach that there are two genders, and that heterosexuality is the essential sort of cultural mode that we need to function in. And that parents have a right to a non-divisive curriculum focused on academics, and that we should not be taking liberties with our curriculum to do anything different than academics. And finally, that we need to infuse Christian beliefs and values into the curriculum, because that's the way we help students become moral. Now, if you were to step back and say, uh, this is the terms that are used to say this is a positive for education for those who are attending the Moms for Liberty, for example, conference. This is what they see is what they're attempting to do, and they don't realize how actually dangerous this is, because it presents this false dichotomy that schools promote either a right-wing or left-wing indoctrination, and therefore this image is okay as a right-wing indoctrination, a right-wing counter to what they see as woke education. But what is really true, and having been in public education, I could say, and as a social studies teacher, our curriculum was more conservative than liberal. It was less woke than it needed to be. And frankly, that public school, the goal of public education is to create independent thinkers, and it's the antithesis of indoctrination. And that's what we actually need to put forward. So how do we communicate in a way that's going to be effective? Well, first of all, we need to understand two central points. One is that the agenda of extremists threatens the well-being of our children, exposes them to abusive and discriminatory behavior in their classrooms. For example, if it's only heterosexuality, the issues around gender and bullying around gender issues comes up in a significant way. And that in fact, it serves in terms of the belief systems, the posting of the Ten Commandments, it serves to indoctrinate children in a particular ideology. And what is key is that in the United States, we have a fundamental freedom to have our children educated to be independent thinkers and caring human beings, free from the indoctrination by extremists of any ideology, in fact. So these are points that I think we need to make. Now, I don't know if you've been watching the way that Kamala Harris has reframed the debate around freedom, and has taken back the term freedom in a significant way. And we have to take back the terms and own the terms and promote what we think is the strongest articulation of the reasons, the core motivation for the work that we do. And so let me move to that. What can we say? Well, first of all, we can say that education really has to be about life success and community contribution. This is common ground for everyone, whether you're conservative or liberal, whether you're Republican or Democrat. That I think everyone wants to have their children be able to graduate and determine their future, to be independent and critical thinkers. And so when we talk about historical accuracy, it is about helping students become critical thinkers. It is about helping them see multiple perspectives and understand multiple perspectives. When we talk about equity, we are really talking about the success of every student and promoting the success, and that it takes different strategies to do that. In terms of inclusion, that as public schools, we have to accept all students, all staff, all parents, and have them feel welcomed in the schoolhouse. That in terms of social emotional learning, we need to be able to talk about it as safety and belonging, that we want all students to feel safe in their schools. We want all students to feel that they belong so that they can be most effectively engaged. And that, frankly, at the heart, we also have to have respect for the common values of all religions and the common values of those who are atheists as well. So we have to respect that diversity. This is the kind of frame that I think we can provide that will enable us to talk more effectively across boundaries of party and across boundaries of some of the differences that we've had. So, there are many ways to frame this. So for example, I think we need to move away from inflammatory rhetoric and we need to call out inflammatory rhetoric and slogans. And then we need to make it clear that, for example, social emotional learning is the most effective way for schools to create safe, positive, and productive learning environments for all students and prepare them with life skills for success in school and work. By pursuing equity, we want all students, regardless of race, economic status, gender, or country of origin, to feel included and be successful. We need to teach history accurately because students need true and accurate information as well as multiple perspectives on historical and current events to enable them to think independently and draw informed conclusions. Culturally responsive teaching enables all students to feel included and respected as they see their cultures reflected in the books they read and the instruction they receive. And frankly, all schools must be a safe place for all students. There is no place in schools for hate and intolerance. These are the kinds of messages that I think we can get out that are very popular with many individuals, the majority of individuals. And we need to state these proactively rather than reactively. So, sort of in conclusion, what I would say is that we need to articulate and stay true to our values, understand the research, bring people together around shared goals, be clear in our communication using languages and messages that resonate. And we actually need to summon courage because it takes courage to go out there and share this work and claim the quality of the work that we're doing. So we close the book with this statement, and I'm going to read it because I think it represents what I hold dear, and I know what Lavelle holds dear. It's that the call to courage in this time is to reclaim and proclaim the value of the work the schools do to promote respect for diversity and inclusivity, to enhance the well-being and the social and emotional development of all children, to affirm the goal of all of equitable access to education and equitable opportunity to succeed, and to provide students with the knowledge and skills that can sustain the future of our democratic society. So, in a brief way, and I'm now going to turn it back to Julie, that's what the book is about. There's many stories in there about the individuals and organizations that are making a difference and how they're making a difference. And I want to encourage you to read it and be encouraged. It is a call to action in a sense. But I'll turn it back to Julie and for a conversation.
Said, why is SEL such a hot button issue? Is empathy such a bad thing? But I think that you showed, what people are actually saying that SEL really is, which it's not, but when, when we're talking about that, how do we quickly get to say, no, that's not what this is?
Well, let me say, first of all, that uh, the two themes that have come out from extremists, right-wing extremists, frankly, have been that SEL is the Trojan horse for critical race theory. Now, I don't know how they got that, but that's one of the statements. The other is that social emotional learning is also the sort of the Trojan horse for what the Moms for Liberty, it's like gender, it's for grooming, that it enables grooming, it enables gender fluidity is the term that they use, that SEL promotes gender fluidity. None of that is true. There is no support of that. I would actually encourage people, there's a website called Leading with SEL. It's all one word. So leadingwithsel.org. It has great materials on social emotional learning and how you can respond. There are toolkits for parents, there are toolkits for board members, there are toolkits for educators. As I see it, and I framed it in we have to just basically say that's really misinformed and disinformed when you hear that social emotional learning is about creating safe spaces in schools so that students can most effectively learn. And it's about helping students learn to collaborate with each other so that they can be most effective both in their schoolwork and in the workplace following school. And it's that simple. And that the skills that we're promoting are really basic skills of social and emotional, emotional management, social communication. And frankly, as I showed, the vast 80 to 90% of parents support the skill development in social emotional learning. And so I think we're on safe ground to say this is valuable. This is valuable work, and it's actually, we want all schools to feel safe. We want all schools, we want kids to be polite. We want kids to know how to respect each other. We want to promote the dignity of every individual. And that's what social emotional learning does.
There's been a little bit of discussion about this in the chat about vouchers. They ask, is there a connection between the expansion of school choice and vouchers with these topics?
Absolutely, because actually, I have an article coming out. It will take a while to have this come out, but the on choice and vouchers. We have to understand, and there's a great book by John Hale. It's Jonhale, on choice and vouchers. It's the choices we make. Um, who it traces the history of charters and choice and vouchers. We have to realize that the history is rooted in segregation. These are policies that promote segregation. And in fact, they undermine the very things we're trying to do. In essence, uh, I'll give you one concrete example. Right now, around the country, a number of right-wing groups are forming charter schools around the Hillsdale College model, which is literally a right-wing, sort of more extremist education platform. And these schools literally are indoctrinating students in right-wing ideology. So in essence, what the advocacy does is actually fragments us. The public schools are the place where all of us gather. It's the place where our communities gather. It's that we own these schools. And once we start funding private schools, once we start, there's a lot of evidence here, but for example, in private schools, I think we've moved to voucher programs, the evidence shows that about 80% of the vouchers go to individuals who are already in private schools. So it essentially subsidizes those who are already in private schools. That low-income individuals actually don't gain advantage because they generally can't afford the additional costs of the private school that they go to. Plus, the private schools don't have the accountability measures that the schools do. So we never know whether students are performing as well or not as well. And in the studies of charter schools and vouchers, schools that are in states where there are vouchers, the private schools and charter schools perform no better than the public schools from which they draw students. And that's the Network for Public Education has done a lot of documentation around that. And there's a lot of studies that support that work. So, and you can look at it in the Project 2025, which is all about privatizing public
Mhm.
education,
Mhm.
which essentially undermines the core of what democracy is about. Gathering us in a place so that we can learn to live with difference, so that we can hear different perspectives, so that we can see that community is more than our friends and those with whom we agree.
Well, I know here in Ohio, we've had a lot of issue with the whole charter school movement, and someone wrote about the vouchers in Ohio as well, in the chat. So that definitely has been something that has been a detriment to our school districts. So someone asked, as a former superintendent, what advice do you have for us to influence superintendents who work for extremist boards and are bound to do what those boards demand or lose their jobs?
We stand for, I wrote a book on ethics actually a couple of years ago for administrators, school administrators. And one of the things I said is that we each have an ethical identity. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to live up to those ethics. And frankly, in those extremist boards, we sometimes have to take the risk to say, no, this isn't good for children, and that these perspectives are not appropriate. I live uh, now in Oregon, and in the community next to mine, the was a superintendent, Sarah Johnson, fantastic superintendent in Crook County, who was superintendent of the year. Three sort of Moms for Liberty candidates got elected. She met with them and decided that their values and her values were so inconsistent that she could not lead in the same way. And she left. Now, there are others who've been fired by boards, but they have taken a stand to say, this is not right.
Mhm.
And so, you take a look at places like Bucks County in Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
where an extremist group came in, extremist board came in, fired the superintendent. They brought in someone else, but then the community organized. They elected five pro-education candidates to the board. They changed those policies, brought in a different superintendent. We have to, as leaders, as school leaders, we have to stand for something.
Mhm.
And I think it's important. That's why I said at the beginning, we shouldn't be saying what's most popular, but we should be saying what needs to be said. And
Mhm.
as school leaders, we need to stand up for what's right for kids. Our jobs are less important than our integrity.
So the next question that someone has in the chat is, are colleges who are dropping DEI programs doing so because they're losing funding?
Sometimes they are, and it depends on the state. That this is where I think it's critical about who we elect in which states. Um, it's about, who's the governor, who is the governing board of the
Mhm.
universities. We need to reestablish the value of the work we're doing. I would say that, there are school districts, there are professional development programs where mistakes have been made, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and approaches. But frankly, the majority of that work is incredibly valuable work in helping us understand, the biases that we may bring to our work, helping us understand how we can reach the diversity of students who are in front of us. And how we promote success for all students.
Mhm.
So this isn't, and I think, I laugh about woke actually, because what woke means is that we are conscious of things like injustice and discrimination. And frankly, we should be conscious of injustice and discrimination.
Mhm.
And it's our responsibility to be, woke in that way. And so I don't take it as a criticism. I see it as a compliment when somebody says that individual is woke.
Mhm.
So, I think we have to bring back that awareness. That's why I said we have to claim this work.
Mhm.
And we have to take pride in this work. And we can't be intimidated. Just like, for a long time, many on the right claimed freedom as their, we are for freedom. And
Mhm.
what the Harris campaign has done is turn that on its head and
Mhm.
essentially said, no, you're not for freedom. You're actually for more dictatorship than freedom. And here's what freedom really means. So I think in the same way, we need to say equity is really critical. It
Mhm.
is about guaranteeing the success of all children. This is a major difference. The difference, if you think about equality, which I think they would say everybody should be equal in front of the
Mhm.
law. And that is true. Everybody should be equal in a way and have equal opportunity. But you don't get there through just providing everybody with the same thing. You wouldn't provide everybody with the same education. The analogy, Scott Menzel, the superintendent in Scottsdale, who is just a courageous leader, a wonderful leader. And he often says, if we were to be equal, we'd give everybody the same eyeglasses. Now, Julie, you and I know that we're wearing glasses, but I'm sure
Yes.
there's a different prescription, right?
Yes.
My glasses won't work for you, and your glasses won't work for me.
That's
So the
correct.
absurdity of thinking that equality is the only solution and that equity, giving people what they need is
Mhm.
key. So, we need to put it in simple terms and we need to claim it.
I am completely with you on this because I believe we need to take back the language that others use for bad. I think that we need to, and I think in claiming the truth that we do that. Um, this is a question that I love because this is one that where their logic or the logic of the extremists makes no sense. Someone said if kids could be indoctrinated to be a different gender, then why aren't trans kids indoctrinated to be cisgender by the overwhelming number of books? They put 99%, but I don't know what the percentage really is, that have no trans people in them at all. And that's a valid question.
Yeah,
I've read books about a lot of different folks and a lot of different professions. And at the end of the day, I'm an organizer and an HR director.
yes,
I'm not a doctor or any of the other things that I like to watch on TV or read about.
right. That's right. You know, that's a great point, and I think those are the kinds of points we need to make. We need to really address the reality frankly, schools are incredibly conservative. If you think about the curriculum we teach, the generally we follow a narrow band. Teachers, for the most part, avoid controversy. We are not individuals who want to promote any particular political perspective. What we want to help kids do is think for themselves and have the skills that enable them to look at information, to discern information, to think critically. And I saw one comment in the chat that critical thinking is not allowed. I think that there are those who feel threatened by critical thinking, who feel that uh, and in a sense, there's a psychological piece of this that, in fact, they feel vulnerable because their views are vulnerable to critique and they don't want to be challenged. These are, and we have to be direct about it. Kids need to think critically. They need to be able to reason with facts. We need, the most I think the most undermining factor the last number of years has been the statements around fake news and in that those are your facts. I have my facts, and they're alternate facts. There's no such thing as alternate facts. Um, that um, there's a great ethicist, Susan Leoto, who really looks at that statement about alternate facts and says that is the most undermining of all morality, because then you can't judge right from wrong.
Mhm.
uh, when you are inventing your own facts. And so we have to move away from that.
Big time. Um, Someone wrote, it's a very hard time to be a school administrator. It's not the kids, it's the grown-ups. So what's your best advice for school administrators to continue to build a positive culture within the walls of their school while ensuring every stakeholder feels heard, but the learning space is truly protected? Sometimes it feels like the walls are closing in.
Yeah, it's a great statement. And I think that we spend actually a chapter in the book, and it's hard to summarize it in the short time we have. But let me say this. First of all, uh, the statements that I put forward, those core purpose statements, are statements we can all articulate to build common ground, because those are common ground. And that's what the research has shown, that essentially, if we can articulate that safety and well-being, for example, around social emotional learning, we're promoting safety and well-being. We are promoting success for all students. We want all students to feel that they are valued in our schools and that they have a place in our schools. That we want all students to be independent, thinkers. Those kinds of statements bring a lot of people together. But there are other strategies as well. So, for example, setting up meeting norms where respect is key. And that those, for example, at board meetings, that there be a set of norms that both are represented by the board's process and represented by those who speak. And here's the permissible boundaries around our participation. We spend a lot of time talking about the difference between debate and dialogue. And actually, there's even some suggestions about how to move from debate to dialogue. Debate is where two people, battle against each other and to see which idea is the best. Dialogue is we work together around different ideas to see if we can come to common ground. And it is really critical in our time now to move to this place where we can find common solutions, where we can find common agreements. And frankly, there is more in common than, and what I would say is 10 years ago or 15 years ago, 10 years ago, actually, as a superintendent, I would have some individuals would come to board meetings and be disruptive or have a particular political agenda, whether that was left or right, but they would have a particular political agenda, and we were able to manage that in an effective way. That has degenerated significantly. And we need to put it back in its place, that the meetings we have to be respectful. They have to honor difference, but at the same time, I like to say we have to be soft on people and hard on problems. If there's a problem and it's a realistic problem, then we need to address that problem. If it's a misunderstanding, then we need to address that misunderstanding. But we have to address it in a way that's respectful, rather than demeaning. We have to move away from the kind of demeaning attitudes uh, and uh, and abusive attitudes and abusive language that we use of each other. And we have to call that out when it happens and say that's not appropriate and that's not acceptable here. We treat each other with respect. We can differ, and we can look at how we can resolve our differences. And we may not be able to resolve our differences, which is fine, but we need to be able to be respectful of each other.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left, and someone asked, and I think that this is what we kind of turn to, say more about turning back towards fostering public support of public education. Here at Red, Wine, and Blue, we do encourage everyone to get involved, whether you have children in the district or not. You are a taxpayer in that district. You live in that community. You live in that area. You live in the state. And the quality of our schools affect us all. But what what do you say to, in terms of your perspective on public support of public education?
I think you stated it incredibly well. We're all invested because, in fact, it is what sustains our communities and it is what sustains our democracy. We need to have well-educated children who grow up to be involved, engaged, and thoughtful individuals who can make a contribution to their community. And that the way we best do that is through public education and the value of public education. I've been in districts that are urban districts like Louisville. I've been in a suburban district like Andover, Massachusetts,
Mhm.
and a wide range of districts. And what I can say to you is that public school teachers and public school administrators are heroes and heroines, and we need to value their work. We need to bring back sort of the strength of public education, and that's
Mhm.
everybody's responsibility because, the very value of our communities is based on the education we offer our children.
Mhm.
It is the torch that we pass on from generation to generation, and this is our way of saying we value you as children, and we want to make sure that you have the best skills and the best way of thinking that'll take us to the next step.
So if folks wanted to ask you any questions or get a hold of you, is your contact information? Does Julie have it? Julie can give it out as well.
That's right. And I have a website as well. It's sheldonberman.com. People can go to the website. It's actually under reconstruction, but it's a very simple. And I'm on AASA. They can reach me through AASA. It's Shelley.Berman at aasa.org. So
All
very
right.
simple.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so very much for coming and sharing with us this evening. Um, this is a topic that we talk about a lot here at Red, Wine, and Blue in terms of the extremism that's going on in our school boards and in our schools as it relates to history, to SEL, to all of the topics. I, again, thank you for reinforcing what we already teach. And we're reinforcing what you have already shared too. So I think this was a really good presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and continue to do the terrific work you're doing. It's
Thank
so
you.
important. So Red, Wine, and Blue, there's an organization is so valuable at this moment. So thank you for all you do.
Thanks so much.
All
Well,
right.
with that, everyone, I just will encourage you to go to our website, redwine.blue/events, to sign up for the events that are coming up. Make sure that you are plugged into our rally or squads. We have found that, contacting your friends and your family is 42 times more effective than contacting strangers during this election season. So please do that, and I will see you all next week. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.